The Morgan Report with David Morgan.
David Morgan with you, themorganreport.com. Well, this week we saw the Dow Jones Transportation Index exceed the 2018 highs. We also saw the industrial spiders make an upside breakout. So my commentary about stock market weakening and all that, which it did when I reported, it's coming back. It's coming back strong. The S&P 500 is testing its overhead resistance, and it looks like we might be making that final high. Maybe it won't be the final high. To me, I think it could be and most likely will be a final high, and then I am expecting after the election, sometime in November through December, the last 2 months of this year, to see some type of rather significant correction in the general equity markets. Time will tell. First up this week from CNBC Markets, the European economy. Europe's major economies predict more dire declines to come as coronavirus rages. Key point, major European economies are warning of worse growth rates to come, downgrading already dire forecasts on the back of a second wave of coronavirus infections sweeping through the continent. From oilprice.com, interesting headline, oil prices and the pandemic will force Gulf banks to merge. The low oil prices and the coronavirus pandemic have increased the financial pressure on the banks in the Gulf region, which will be looking for more mergers and acquisition opportunities at times of decreased profitability, Moody's Investor Services said in a report on Tuesday. From Mishtalk, 3,500 corporations so fed up with Trump's tariffs, they sued the United States. Thousands of companies filed trade lawsuits against the U.S. over Trump's tariffs. Coca-Cola, Disney, Ford, Abbott Labs, Tesla, and Home Depot are among the thousands of companies suing the U.S. over tariffs. About 3,500 companies, including some I just named, have sued the Trump administration in the last 2 weeks over the imposition of tariffs on more than $300 billion in Chinese-made goods. The suits filed in the U.S. Courts of International Trade named U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and the Customs and Border Protective Agency and challenge what they call the unlawful escalation of the U.S. trade war with China through the imposition of a third and fourth round of tariffs. Back to CNBC as the wealth gap widens. Total billionaire wealth surges to record high of $10.2 trillion during the coronavirus crisis, research says. Research from UBS and PricewaterhouseCoopers found that global billionaire wealth climbed $10 trillion between April and July this year, up $8 trillion at the start of April. That reflects an increase of wealth of 27.5% and exceeded the previous peak of $8.9 trillion recorded at the end of 2017. From ABC News, 150 million people set to fall into extreme poverty due to COVID pandemic, World Bank warns. The World Bank has warned that 150 million people could fall into extreme poverty by the end of 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic and accompanying global recession, with the levels of global poverty set to rise for the first time in 20 years. In a new Poverty and Shared Prosperity report, the organization said that between 9.1 and 9.4% would be affected by extreme poverty, which is defined by the group as living on under $1.90 a day. Had the pandemic not hit, the rate was forecast to fall to 7.9% this year. From Reuters, no skiing but still mountaintop luxury at 2021 World Economic Forum near Lucerne. There won't be any snow, but there'll still be a dramatic Swiss mountaintop backdrop as the world's elite gather for the World Economic Forum, the WEF, annual meeting near the city of Lucerne next year. Bernstock in central Switzerland has been chosen to host the May meeting of the world's political and business leaders over Davos, the alpine ski destination synonymous with the annual Jamboree. The coronavirus pandemic has forced the WEF to move the meeting from the resort that has hosted the high-profile event since the early 70s, but it said it still aimed to return to Davos for the 2022 annual meeting. The UPI, United Press International, IMF says COVID-19 lockdowns are better for quicker economic recovery. Shutdowns during the coronavirus pandemic may create short-term costs for global economies, but will likely lead to faster recoveries, a new report said from the IMF. The IMF found that economic lockdowns, which include limited mobility, wearing face coverings, and following distance protocols, have quote-unquote substantially reduced the spread of the virus. Shift Gold put out this news item that the national debt surges past $27 trillion. Not surprising with all the borrowing that's gone on. There's been basically a 30% increase in money supply over the last few months to try to keep the economy afloat, I would say. And this is going to have quite a rebound effect on the inflationary environment going forward. Well, let's take a brief look at the U.S. debt clock. This is found at the usdebtclock.org, and you can see verification of the national debt at over $27 trillion. And if you come over here to the right-hand column, you can see the paper to silver ratio is now at 178 to 1. The paper to gold ratio is now at 88.6 to 1. The dollar to crypto ratio is about 52 to 1. And you can also see the dollar to silver ratio is now $3,911 per ounce. And if you do the same thing with gold, you will find $29,750 per ounce. If you look at the top, it says what the U.S. dollar to gold ratio is now. It is the year-over-year increase in the U.S. M2 money supply divided by the yearly production of gold in ounces. And the same metrics apply for the price of silver, which is nearly $4,000 per ounce, using that data. Well, let's move on to food. This is from United Press International, UPI. Groundwater depletion means peak grain has gone for some high plains states. Peak grain has already passed for several high plains states, according to a new survey of groundwater depletion across the region. To more accurately predict future grain yields, researchers looked at the relationship between levels of water extraction from the aquifer and the amount of grain harvested in each state over the last 50 years. Research adopted analysis techniques previously used to study the relationship between peak oil and peak grain production. The research team detailed the results of their analysis in a new paper published Tuesday in the journal PNAS. The analysis showed Texas and Kansas had reached peak grain in 2016. Grain yields in the two high plains states have been declining over the last 4 years. Without new yield-producing technologies, grain production in Texas could decline as much as 40% by 2050. For Make It, rather obscure but notable, I'll say, for this week, publication, My Kids Are Starving. Food banks and pantries see explosive demand in North Carolina as pandemic continues. Welcome to the COVID economy. CNBC. Make It deep dive into how the coronavirus pandemic is impacting all areas of our lives, from food to housing, healthcare to small business. We're focusing on North Carolina, a swing state that has seen rapid economic growth and growing inequality since the last recession, to learn how residents are weathering the economic consequences of this once-in-a-lifetime health crisis. From Zero Hedge, top U.S. food bank warns of nationwide quote-unquote meal shortages in the next 12 months. Well, silver and gold this week have certainly moved substantially. Trump basically made the announcement that there wouldn't be a stimulus until after the election, and that's kind of backing off of that statement. Silver and gold got clobbered on that statement, and they bounced back rather substantially as I'm doing this video at the end of the week. And I still think we're in a trading range, actually a lower one that we'd seen in the previous month or so. And let's just see what happens. I'm still very bullish longer term, but we need to climb that wall of worry, and we're probably going to lose a few participants in the market. I want to bring to your attention the LODE project at ag.lode.one. It's I'm an ambassador, I am invested, so that makes me biased. But welcome to the LODE community, birthplace of the honest money revolution. I'd say that's pretty true. I've been with it from the inception. If you go to the main landing page, I would suggest you watch this first video called Imagine. It's well done in my estimation, and also gives a pretty clear message of what the whole project is about.
Imagine a world where your money is protected.
Well, let me end this week, as I've been doing the last few, with a few paragraphs from the Law by Frederick Bastiat, the classic blueprint for a just society. Page 74 and top of page 75. The desire to rule over others. This must be said. There are too many great men in the world, legislators, organizers, do-gooders, leaders of the people, fathers of nations, and on and on. Too many persons place themselves above mankind. They make a career of organizing it, patronizing it, and ruling it. Now someone will say, you yourself are doing this very thing. True, it must be admitted that I act an entirely different sense. True, but it must be admitted that I act in an entirely different sense. If I have joined the ranks of the reformers, it is solely for the purpose of persuading them to leave people alone. I do not look upon people as Rasputin looked upon his automaton, rather as the physiologist accepts the human body as it is, so I do accept people as they are. I desire only to study and admire. I'll wrap it up for this weekly perspective, only to note that almost everything I went over this week has to do with the CVEE situation, and you can make up your own mind on it. I'm going to say somewhat neutral, but again, I will say what I have said several times, and that is, it's interesting that it coincides with the economic collapse that would have taken place without the pandemic. You can take with that statement what you wish. I do think that it's being pushed awfully hard. And again, study and make up your own mind on the determination of how much involvement it is, but also be cognizant of the fact that it has basically destroyed the global economy. And if you were a premium member of the Morgan Report, you would have some insight into my thoughts on the World Economic Forum, which I wrote about in the last couple of months. And there's definitely an agenda that you can read for yourself on the WEF website. Till next week, I wish everyone the very best.